there's also, well, there's a ridiculous listicle about the survival, um, just ranking each of Quentin Tarantino's characters out of his movie for zombie survivability, which was like, I don't know who came up with that or why, but that was like kind of random.
That's a slow news week.
That's silly. Of course, I read it and was not surprised to find out that the number one was Beatrix, but you know.
Oh, from Kill Bill?
Yep.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Facts. There was, I think that's everything.
The other things I kind of want to talk to you about are not zombie related, but are I know an intersection of our interests, which are how are you liking Murderbot so far, and
I love it so much.
and how are you liking the trailers for Alien Earth? I don't know if you are gonna like that so much.
I don't know.
I don't know.
I thought Alien Earth looked pretty good.
Yeah.
I know people really like the Murderbot book because I have not read them. HA, I take it you're a fan.
I am. I wouldn't call that, they're more like novellas, like they're a pretty easy read.
Mhm.
Um, it's very snarky and tongue-in-cheek and fun. I feel like I think that the cast is really great and the writing's great. But it's got like that vibe, like he's just very, or they are just very sarcastic.
Mm.
Um, I, but I'm enjoying it thoroughly.
I'm loving them, but I just wish they weren't 24
I
minutes
know.
long.
Well, so Bill and I were watching it the other day, and I was like, "Well, I want to watch the next one." He's like, "That's it," and I like didn't believe him. I was
Yeah.
like, "What?" Yeah.
And like it's a fairly long title credits sequence too. It's like a couple minutes. That's
Like, why
it's
are we
like
taking so many
10% of the episode is the credits. And I'm like, no, unacceptable. I need more of this, not less. So yeah, as soon as you hit skip credits, it's like, oh God, we're halfway through the episode.
I think Apple TV Plus quietly has like a lot of really great shows and especially a lot of really great sci-fi. I mean, they've got Silo, they've got Severance, they've got
Foundation.
Murderbot Foundation, For All Mankind. Like they have kind of taken this lane of like, I don't know what you want to call it, like high production sci-fi and really run with it. I kind of love it.
Yeah.
But you should watch Murderbot though, Kyle. I know.
Yeah, I will.
It's fun. I don't think you need to necessarily have read the book. Maybe. I don't know.
Oh, I don't think you need to. I
They're
don't think.
translating it pretty well, and the characters are all very much alive, it feels like. And
Um,
then the alien thing, now there's a teaser and a trailer out. I think it looks pretty badass, but there's obviously they're expanding the world in a way that is risky.
Yep.
So we'll see.
Um, yeah, and it's got Timothy Olyphantastic, doesn't it?
It does with like a blonde or silver hair
Something's
situation.
going on with his hair, but
Yeah.
it is it out? It's out in August, right?
Yeah, we gotta wait a while.
Yeah.
I
And-
feel like, uh, and maybe this is kind of contrary to what you guys think, but it's like Jurassic Park, Terminator, Alien, three franchises that have at most two good films, but somehow just keep releasing things for like 40 years.
Yeah.
And so I hope it's good because it can't possibly be worse than a lot of the alien related stuff that's come out since. Jurassic Park is really the one that I'm just like, how is this possible that there's one good movie,
Right.
unabashedly good movie in this entire franchise of like 8 films, and Terminator's kind of the same way. Alien's a little better.
I think
There's some interesting stuff in Prometheus and things like that, but
So
overall,
what I think it boils down to is that the concept is incredibly attractive. So like the kernel, like the basis of the story is something that people are like, so like with Jurassic Park, I mean, that first film, and we rewatched it recently because a friend of ours hadn't seen it. And while it felt like, and admittedly, it's kind of interesting just because, things have sped up in terms of how they edit, and the story is just much slower than we're used to now in terms of like what's coming out currently. But it does pretty well. It still holds up pretty well, and there's that moment when you see all like it's that whole thing, like when you're a kid, like the idea that dinosaurs could be walking around. Like I think that's why. I think that's why. Same thing with Alien. Like the whole kernel of the story is really like amazing, and so people just can't let it go because they're like, "Well, what if we did this?" And it's like, "Oh, but we don't need to do 12 things with this." I don't know, but what I'm thinking though is that maybe the show will be akin to Watchmen, like the Watchmen series that came out that I was a little skeptical and it was actually excellent.
Oh
So
man, yeah. That
Yeah.
was a bummer that they only did one season of that.
it is, but in some ways, because it was so good, it kind of stands, and I'm okay
Yeah.
if they don't mess with that again, So maybe this will be like that. It does look pretty good. I'll take a look
Hmm.
because I'm obsessed with the kernel of that story too.
Yeah.
But I will also tell you that so much of it is crap, and it's weird because
Alien, though, I mean, the only really, for me, Alien 4 was the one that was not good. The rest of them have all been pretty watchable.
oh, for me
Prometheus
after
could stray into that territory, but Romulus that just came out was actually pretty solid. Yeah.
I would
But
say after the first two, I'm like, I just don't. It's not for me.
Well,
But
and every once in a while, these franchises can surprise you. I thought, as someone who's not really a fan of any of the rest of the films in the franchise, Prey was very good, which is
super good.
the Predators movie set in like 1700s America.
I
Um,
don't think I saw that.
oh, it's so good. The main character is a Native American woman who has to fight off the Predator, and she's badass.
Amber
Oh, may
Midthunder
have
is
to.
the
I'll
actor.
take your recommendation. I'd watch that. It's called Prey.
It's called Prey. Yeah. And
Okay.
it's just like, wow. I mean, in my opinion, most of the rest of this entire franchise is extremely mid. And then there's just this incredible one in the middle where they let somebody run with a cool idea. So,
Yeah.
All right. Well, I'll do that. But anyway, we'll have to see about this. But I am thoroughly enjoying Murderbot. Again, I mean, I do like, couldn't they have made it a little longer?
Yeah. They're just wanting, keeping us wanting more. Isn't that what they're
Um,
supposed to do?
I am very specifically, well, I'm enjoying all of his commentary, Murderbot's commentary, but I also am very much enjoying the presentation of the crew because they are exactly like they are presented in the book, and it's really just phenomenal casting. So just it's a lot of fun.
Yeah.
So enjoying thoroughly.
Well, I'm glad to hear it. I'm glad. Yeah, good. You're listening to Reanimated.
Oh,
My name's Stuart, and you're listening to me, H.A. Conrad, and Kyle Diaz, and we are talking not any longer about The Last of Us, although it is still at the top of the streaming charts as of last week.
but surprise, I'm still here.
Well done. Welcome back.
One more special appearance.
I'm
you
sure.
say
I'm sure
that.
you're
You'll be back. You'll be
I'll
back.
be back. I'll be back. I meant in a row.
okay. Yeah, we don't want to glut ourselves on Kyle. We need to. A little bit goes a long way. That sounds meaner than I meant it. Uh,
Is there something I'm unaware of, Stuart?
no, I don't know. I'm just filling air. Wow, good podcasting. We are talking today about Nosferatu, which came out at the end of last year. And we have a little bit of news to talk about before we get to that picture. In the news this week, we have a fair amount of excitement, I think, surrounding George A. Romero's daughter, because her film Queens of the Dead is coming out when?
Premiering at the Tribeca Film Festival, so fairly soon, I think.
It doesn't help us know when we're going to be able to see it.
Usually it's pretty fast after the festival. Oh, so it's premiering today.
At Tribeca?
Hmm.
Wonderful. It's also kind of like a big Romero news week because what Day of the Dead I think is having its 40th anniversary and is coming back to screens in places, uh, which is cool too. But I mean, the fact that she's getting a write-up in the New York Times, I know she's kind of she's like a person of interest in New York because she's also a DJ for several years in New York and is a known entity there in theory. I say that not knowing anything about known entities in New York. HA, have you ever interacted or heard about Tina Romero spinning?
I mean, I have heard of her for obvious reasons, but I think she's got her own thing going on. But I mean, she's like, I think probably like many children of famous people, and especially somebody like him who has such a cult following. I think she kind of tried to do her own thing. So she had like an alter ego or something like that. But then clearly she has totally embraced it. But I think as a DJ, she did the whole like she had like a mask on and stuff like that, so people like didn't know who she was. I don't
Okay.
know that they would automatically be like, "There's a Romero," but maybe I don't know. Um, but anyway, there's a whole thing, and there's like a whole article in the New York Times talking about her new film, but also about a lot of the like strife and disagreements in terms of George Romero's legacy, and where sort of the future of this particular franchise goes. So I'm curious to watch this film. I think it'll be interesting. And so that is that's her stuff, but then there's also apparently some disagreements from the person that who is it, the other director and his second wife, something like that. Like they're all trying to do their own things with his legacy. And
Hmm.
look, I'm totally on board with like doing things, I guess, within the franchise, but I also think it would be kind of cool if she did her own zombie thing. And that sounds kind of like what she's doing, but she's trying to honor him. It seems actually in line with maybe his vision, but we'll see. I think until you see it, we can't really wrap our minds around it, but we'll have to see.
I'm seeing stills of the film that show Katie O'Brien is one of the characters, playing one of the characters in the film. And I've mentioned this before, but Katie O'Brien, if I was casting The Last of Us, would have been who I would have tried to get to play Abby just because she's stacked, as it were. She's got real big muscles. Because I'm still hung up on that. Even though I've been listening to a lot of podcasts this week about the reception of the finale after we finished talking about it, because you try not to listen to those before you talk about it. And everybody is so insanely excited about Caitlin Deaver coming, being in the center, but at least in the podcast that I'm listening to, being in the center next season. But they are also then bemoaning the fact that we have to wait probably 2 years to see that story.
Dude, I have to say, one thing we did not explicitly, discuss last week is how down you sounded about the entire like collapse of the finale. Like just during that entire episode, you were just kind of like, yeah, I know. It's such a bummer. Like I really felt that you cared about this like franchise and TV show so much and how disappointed you were.
That sums it up. I was pretty down after finishing it. I think part of it is that acknowledgement that we got to wait so freaking long
hmm
to get to the next season, and they've left it at a cliffhanger, and there's a lot. There's a lot. But yeah, I thank you for acknowledging that I was in a dark place recording that podcast. Um, and then other news, unless there's anything else we want to talk about Romero and his legacy and his daughter's upcoming film, is Ryan Coogler's Sinners is now streaming. You can watch it at home, and so I think that'll be coming up soon on Reanimated too. Don't you think, AJ?
Oh, I do. And you know, it is still playing at the Nighthawk, which I kind of want to try to see it in the theater, although we have a projector, so it's kind but it's a different experience, I think. So maybe I'll try to catch that this weekend. I have a bunch of friends who have seen it and just talked about how amazing it was, so I kind of want to try to make that a theater experience. But regardless, I think we should talk about that if you're game.
Oh, always.
I have to say that it is a very good theater film. In fact, one of the things that I was curious about after reading this article is that, or seeing that it's coming to streaming, is that there were quite a lot of different aspect ratios that this film was presented in theaters, depending on whether you were seeing it in standard, IMAX, or 70 millimeter.
Hmm.
You got a slightly different shaped screen with, I think, the 70 millimeter print being kind of the canonical one or the one that's, Kugler considers to be the finest showing. And so it looks like no one's quite sure what's going to happen in the scene. In the movie, there are two scenes that expand from widescreen to full screen for the IMAX presentation. and no one's quite sure whether that will happen in the streaming versions, but it seems to happen in the iTunes versions, or like the digitally purchased ones.
Hmm.
So I'm a little bit curious to see how they deal with some of the presentation aspects of this film on streaming.
Oh, fascinating. I look forward to seeing if I even notice. Not having seen it in the other presentation. But yeah, cool. And then the last piece of news is regarding Cillian Murphy and his presence in 28 years later, which is to say he will not be in this movie coming out in June. He will be in I guess, the fourth movie in the franchise, The Bone Temple. And this article from Bloody Disgusting talks about how that movie hasn't quite met its financing goals, and they're really hoping that Cillian Murphy's presence in the second film will help them reach those. I presume that like the performance of the film in June coming right up in like 2 weeks is going to really catapult their financing for the third film too. But
I
it's
I just have to say how clever of them to be like, all right, he's not going to be in these, but he'll be in this one. So how about you help us finance it? It's smart. So
Mhm.
I'm glad he'll be appearing in one, or at least semi-promising to appear in one, but we shall see.
That's coming right up though. June 20th, very soon. Yeah, so that's kind of the end of those little bits of news. We then can transition into our feature film Nosferatu, directed by Robert Eggers, screenplay by Robert Eggers, cinematography by Yaron Blaschke. And my upfront overview is that this is a filmmaker's film. I want to say, and so Kyle, I'm sure that you have a lot of thoughts based on your kind of inside baseball approach to film about how it was put together. Um, and there's also just an incredible cast in this film.
Yeah, and I think we should also talk about how obsessed with this particular, he's been obsessed with this apparently all his life.
Since he was 8, yeah,
Yeah.
that's pretty disturbing.
It's a little, yeah. Um, and I do want to hear what Kyle has to think about this. And I thought about this as I was watching it, just what your take on certain things were. I would say just at the outset, it is a very beautiful film, just gorgeous, from my perspective. But also I just have to say, how much extra can you get? Like they actually filmed in Transylvania, they actually filmed at the castle that was sort of the inspiration, or they think is the inspiration. But there's just uh, so much to talk about here just in the making and the artistry of the film. So Kyle, I would like to get your hot take before we really get into it.
Well, I have a couple of questions actually. So first of all, I think there's this weird thing with the original Nosferatu where it's this unbelievably influential film on kind of the language of cinema and specifically horror cinema for, continuing up through till today, even in films that aren't directly based on it. But yet, also, n almost no one has actually seen it because it's 1922 era silent film in black and white. So, have you guys ever actually like watched the original Nosferatu?
Yes,
Nar.
yeah.
Okay.
Have you?
Yes, I watched it in film school. And then I revisited little bits and pieces of it for this. But it uh it is it is scary. From a modern perspective, it's more of a curiosity than anything else. So the way that Eggers describes being drawn in by it and truly connecting with it is not something that I feel. The language of film has advanced so far since then, and especially, many of the things that we think of as being kind of integral to the film experience, relating to mostly sound, like, the performances that people give through dialogue and the music. We don't even really have a kind of a canonical score to watch the film to. So there's a couple different versions floating around, I think, with different soundtracks to it.
Right.
Um,
And then also remember the whole plagiarism of Dracula, and there's that, it's an adaptation, obviously, but and I'm kind of thinking of it in terms of influential, like thinking about the age he watched it,
Hmm.
how it maybe hit a little differently, because I don't think I feel like I watched this when I was like, I'm going to say I was like late in high school, and then I watched it again in college. Both actually like with um different scores. So that's also definitely changes your experience. There was and then maybe I even saw it a third time. They did because of the film we talked about last time where Willem Dafoe actually plays like it's the whole
Shadow of the Vampire, I
yeah,
think.
and I feel like that is how I saw it. The third, they did like a showing of this, and then it was like sort of this thing with Shadow the Vampire, which was very cool to be able to see those things kind of back to back. Um, and yeah, so, but I hear you. It's if you watch it and you hear all these things about it, it does feel like, oh, I don't know that I would necessarily have thought that this would be as influential as it actually was. But I guess I mean, at the time, right, the filmmaking techniques and what they were doing were groundbreaking.
Yeah, I mean, we're talking about a movie that came out only a couple of years into, the concept of the feature film as we understand it, as in like an hour to hour and a half long, you know, uh, solo presentation. Most films that came out in the 1910s were like a succession of quick, shorts that were kind of presented back to back. Um, One thing that I think most people watching this version of Nosferatu may not quite understand is to ha the extent to which this is an actually extremely faithful um, remake. There are lots and lots of dialogue lines that are drawn directly from the title card dialogue presented in the original Nosferatu. There are lots of um, you know, either direct or kind of reinterpreted homages to the imagery from that film. So, and it follows the story beats extremely faithfully. I would say almost 100% faithfully to the original Nosferatu film. So, this is not a thing where it's like there are some little tweaks here and there are a couple of scenes inserted and stuff like that, but for the most part, I think most people would be surprised to learn how faithful of an adaptation this really is.
Right.
Um,
And then the other just thing that, I think people just automatically think that this is a thing, but the whole idea and the trope that sunlight kills vampires, that came from this film directly. That wasn't in Dracula. And so that is obviously a key thing that has lived on in many different like the many different types of vampire stories and things like that. And then I guess also the idea that the vampire would be horrifically like is more a monster, is seductive despite the fact that they're a monster. It's like repulsive. Just a very different take, and we've seen so many different like ways that this has influenced other types of tales.
My other question was how familiar you guys are with Robert Eggers' work. So, have you guys watched The Witch or The Lighthouse or The Northman or any of his other films?
I started the Northman, and then it wasn't the kind of vampire. That wasn't the kind of Viking content that I usually in. Yeah, so no. Like I think that's what I'm saying when I say this is a filmmaker's film. I think that's kind of where he hangs out.
Yep.
It's not so much mainstream. It's more nuanced than that. So I didn't finish the Northman, but and I did not see the Lighthouse or the Witch. So no, short answer.
I have the witch I found very disturbing. Um, because of my thing about possession and such.
Yes, that
Um,
makes sense.
but um, but still, I mean, I thought it was an incredibly effective film, and I think that this is definitely in his wheelhouse in terms of the types of things that he does. And I think he is, I mean, yes, it's a filmmaker's film, but I think he's an incredible filmmaker from my point of view. And maybe it's just because I like to hang out in these kinds of places too. But also clearly loves the Skarsgårds, right?
Yeah.
He seems like a faithful guy. Like a lot of the people, Willem Dafoe, the guy who plays Severs, was in, I
Mhm.
want to say The Witch, one of those. So yeah, there's a lot of those familiar faces and voices in his productions, feels like.
Yeah, and I would also say like that was the other thing with the original, and maybe it given that he says that it was such an influence on his filmmaking, like German expressionism, that is clearly this is one of those things that just sort of started to spread and influence. And again, because it was so early on, I find it fascinating that it still has legs, but definitely, at least in his world, it does. But what's your? I'd love to hear what you think about that, Kyle, as well. I mean, it's his own thing, but it's definitely he's homaging all over the place.
Yeah, I mean, uh, this film is I guess a little different than the rest of his stuff in that it is kind of, he's trying to play more by the rules of
Hmm.
established genres or in an established film. I love The Witch. It is actually, I would say it's one of my favorite films. Um I don't quite understand why, because it is a very disturbing movie. But I also find it to be uh, kind of a weirdly triumphant movie, and that's a whole other like podcast that we can get into or something. But I find the main character's journey in that film very affecting, and I think there's a lot of um, parallels and comparisons to be made to Ellen's journey in this film from The Witch. So I'm kind of happy to see him return to like this straightforwardly horror realm, because the Lighthouse was kind of something a little different, and then The Northman was, also kind of not a straightforward, horror movie at all. And so I was very excited to return to kind of form here with him, and I found this movie very compelling, really fun to watch from a production and cinematography perspective, quite scary and disturbing in some places. And I have some reservations about some of the larger themes or some of the elements that have been introduced that I think are only like 70% successful. So it's not a film that I think I'm going to love as much as those other films, but there are definitely elements of it that I love very much.
Where did you guys see this?
I saw it at home on my laptop.
Yeah,
Me too.
on what platform?
Oh, on Apple TV Plus or
Same.
Apple TV. I rented it through Apple TV.
Yeah, I did too.
Okay, I watched it on Peacock, and then I realized after I'd watched it, it was the extended cut. So I don't even, it was 2 hours and 15 minutes. Do you remember the running time for the Apple TV one?
There isn't really much different. When Thomas first meets the Count, he talks a bit more about the locals and their beliefs. And on the second day, we get a small scene that shows us the Count talking while looking over Thomas and Ellen. I think I saw that stuff.
This is 2 hours and 12 minutes, so
All right, so maybe that's the only version that made it to streaming. Interesting.
Someone on this Reddit thread said there's a dance number and a rap battle in the extended cut, which that would be pretty funny.
Rap battle or rat battle? Because there is a
Rap battle,
rat battle.
rap battle.
Did you guys
RAP.
see the crazy statistic that there's 5,000 trained rats in this movie?
I
yeah.
believe it, man. There's a lot of rats in this film,
I
and
just did, yeah, like this is part of that, like the filmmaker, the behind the scenes stuff is all the stuff that they chose to do practically, like Skarsgård being like, no, I'm gonna learn Mongolian throat singing to do all this dialogue, instead of using filters or something, like Lily Rose Depp did an interview where she was talking about talking to Bill Skarsgård, in character but not in costume, and he's doing the voice, and she's like, I could not understand how this was happening in like he was doing the voice in front of her, and she was having a really hard time with it, because I think he really just he went for broke in terms of you know, everything. I think he went very method on it.
Well,
He
it's one
did.
of those things where you never really know. You know, Eggers has this reputation for like fanatical, almost like slavish dedication to, historical accuracy. He really likes to do stuff on, on location rather than, green screen, that kind of stuff. And you might think like, oh, what does it matter if like the wardrobe that's in the background of one scene is historically accurate to the time? But you never know which of these elements or which of the agglomeration of these elements is going to sell things to the viewer. One movie that I thought a lot about in watching this movie is probably the most recent mainstream example of gothic horror in film that we have is Crimson Peak, which was a Guillermo del Toro film
Yep.
from like 10 years ago ish,
That with Tom Hiddleston.
with Tom Hiddleston and Mia, I can't see her last name, Wasiowski, was, yeah, I don't know. Um, so Crimson Peak is, I think, also a very good film, but it has quite a lot of CGI elements in it, and I think there's some of the imagery there that doesn't land as well because it feels like the actors aren't really in a real place. They're kind of just on a green screen or some sort of like fake make-believe world. And so, you can appreciate the beauty of what you're watching, but it doesn't feel real in the same way. And in this film, it would have been really easy to say, "Oh, we're going so stylized. The cinematography is so, drenched in, shadow and stuff. So we can hide a lot of stuff. There's not really no reason to go to, Transylvania to film on, a real castle." But I think you can see that it's real and that helps sell the, what's happening in the film.
I mean, I guess, yeah. I mean, but they also used real wolves. Like the level, I just don't know that that's necessary. But if they feel like, so that's why I feel like this movie is just a bunch of real stuff that is getting thrown in your face, and I just don't know if I was up to the task of appreciating it as much as after I watched the behind the scenes. I was like, wait a sec, really? Oh wow! But like watching the movie, I'm just like, oh, well, this looks beautiful, but I don't really need to know if those are. I mean, if the wolves are real or not. Maybe that really helped Nicholas Holt's performance because he did look pretty scared.
Yes, he did.
Uh,
Nicholas Hoult has just such a great, like, what the shit have I gotten myself into look on his face this whole film.
Well, the funny thing about that, though, is that he just keeps going on despite being confronted by many things that probably most people would have turned back. Um, I would say even just walking into that village, probably turning right back around and
uh-huh.
would have been made more sense. But yes, he's got a great, and actually hearing him talk about the film and these moments with his character are pretty funny. So if you haven't seen those interviews, like he does this, there's an interview he does where he's like, this is the he's like, this is the part where my character is like, yeah, this is just all fine. This is fine. Um,
I can't imagine what part of the movie that was because nothing was very fine for his character
right.
most of the
I think
film.
that's good. Yes, that's he's very cognizant of that. One thing I did would, and I have not seen this film in a very long time, and it's definitely a different thing and more stylized. But and funnily enough, because Johnny Depp is in it, I kept thinking about Sleepy Hollow. It had a little bit of that feeling, although that I think is just much more fantastic in terms of that storytelling. But the tone and the gothic level of horror, again, different, very different kind of film. But it had to me like a similar thing going on. Though certainly they also relied quite a bit on CGI.
Hmm.
And to your point, just about Crimson Peak. I think maybe it's like I felt like Crimson Peak was supposed to almost be like a dreamlike state and or it felt like it was. So maybe that's the difference here. Although this had a little bit of that quality in certain parts of it where um I think that there's to me a bleeding through of reality and dream state and I think it's deliberate so that you're not always quite sure if is that really happening or is the character experiencing that.
Yeah.
I think it's deliberate and supposed to make you feel a little disturbed or a lot disturbed rather. So,
I
but more
agree.
so when you realize that it's real. And I do think that those practical effects help that. I honestly, when I was watching the whole piece about the rats, I really thought those were, I was like, there's no way they had that many rats on set. And
Trained, each one individually trained, right?
right, like I just couldn't believe it. And I was really honestly even more like this must have been like a pretty challenging film for anybody associated with it. But I do think that it created such a rich tapestry to be able to tell the story and did it very like faithfully in some ways. But agree with you. I'm sure we're going to talk about it. Some of the themes that were introduced that I'm like, there were reasons why I didn't really want to watch this for a while. So,
Yeah, I'm
and
kind of curious to hear what those are, if you want to share that now or later.
Um, I can share it now. I mean, I think that there's, and I mean, I don't think that this is a shock to anybody, but like mental illness and how it was treated, and specifically how women were treated in terms of these kinds of things. I definitely think those are incredibly disturbing to me. Sexual assault on many levels in this film, and I don't know that some of this was necessary, but I guess I just didn't like, and so I had heard sort of a couple of people who I knew that went to see it, and they're like, yeah, like there's just, you know, don't go into this without being aware of the fact that these are happening in this. Like you have to be prepared just from a trigger warning point of view.
Hmm.
And I look, if you saw the what's it, is it the lighthouse? Like he likes to be disturbing in that way, I would say. But this is, I don't know that this added to the story. So,
I
I'll
see.
Kyle,
I'll kind of separate out a couple pieces of this. So Ellen's role in this film is really beefed up from
yeah,
prior versions of Nosferatu and from most versions of Dracula. Um, but where Mina Harker is obviously the counterpoint. They've given her a real backstory, and I actually found the stuff about especially her mental illness and the way that she struggles with getting anyone to take her seriously and to take her warning seriously a really affecting addition. I thought that um, was very tragic, and she spends the entire film essentially being ignored, dismissed, or controlled by the mostly men around her, including her husband, who loves her but also leaves against her wishes and doesn't listen to the warnings that she's trying to give him and things like that. The way that she calls Nosferatu accidentally into this world and then has this encounter that is disturbing and traumatic for her, and then the fact that he kind of almost stalks her or continues to appear in her life against her will. I feel like all of that is really richly allegorical to the lived experiences of a lot of women and is something that I appreciated as an addition to this film in the way that, you know, women are assaulted or abused by mostly men in their life, and then those men sometimes won't won't go away. The real part where I just had an issue wasn't with any of the setup of that. It's actually with the very end where there's this odd kind of consent element where, the character of Ellen is supposed to have this power over Nosferatu, and the last act that she does is kind of proactively embracing. And I realize we're skipping all the way to the end, but we're kind of talking about this topic. She kind of proactively embraces that power in terms of consenting to him drinking her blood, and then that's what allows her to kill the vampire in the end. And uh, it really just rang a little bit false to me because her consent seemed as coerced as anything else in the film. I mean, you know, Orlok basically said, submit to me. Yeah, I won't come to you until you submit to me. But in the meantime, I'm going to basically burn down your entire life and kill everyone you love and everyone that you ever met before. And so it didn't feel like a powerful act to me. It felt uh, tragic and doomed, as most of the characters in this feel doomed. So just that final ending, I think I was supposed to feel like she was embracing her agency and her power, and instead I kind of felt exactly the opposite.
Yeah.
So I I hear you on maybe trying to make her a more powerful character, and I think your point about the end is exactly my issue with it, is I think that they could have done more with her and um while they beefed up her role and made her much more, you know, these things are tragic in terms of how women were treated. I think if they were going to do this and make her this heroine at the end who's doing the sacrifice, the way to do that is to do a lot more with her character, which I don't think they did a good job enough, a good enough job of showing that and showing her rebellion. Um, I don't, I think this is just the way they're telling the story, and that was, um, you know, again, it's they're giving her definitely much more of a platform, but I think that was my issue with it, is that it did feel less of, it felt more to me more exploitative and capitulation at the end versus her being, you know, this powerful female figure who's just making this decision. And so that's yeah. So I
Yeah.
don't so really it bothered me. But I don't know that that was necessarily the intention. But I think, you know, they're also within the confines of the story. However, they go outside of, so they color outside of the lines on a lot of points in this. So I don't know. That's just that was just my take on it, and I feel like it could have been a lot more powerful had this been presented slightly differently and her character given a little bit more to work with.
Yeah, I agree with most of that, and I think it contrasts again to The Witch, which I'm not going to spoil here, but oh, how can I do this without spoiling it?
I
There's
know.
there's
I
a
was trying.
there's an
I
embrace of power and destiny in that film that feels more empowering to me and like a fuller expression of the character than this is.
Exactly. And that's a little bit where that's where I thought it was going, and when it didn't, I was very disappointed.
Yeah.
Well, I agree with both of you that I also felt that the end was a shame given her character and the arc that she was provided in a way. If you read the tagline on the poster of this movie, it just says "Succumb to the darkness." So I guess that's the thesis statement in a
Hmm.
way. Um, yeah, I was gonna make some stupid lighthearted joke about how this movie is essentially just a love triangle between a realtor and the realtor's wife and the guy he's selling a house to, but then that feels really stupid and in contrast to what you guys are talking about. So I'm just gonna keep that in my hip pocket for
I,
another
you know,
conversation.
can we also talk about, um, signing of documents in languages you don't understand with incredibly
I
strange.
mean, Orlok is so full of shit. I mean,
Yeah.
Yeah,
he's like he signed his life away to me. It's like he didn't know what the heck he was signing, and it's just yeah,
like
he's a liar and a manipulator.
well, let's also talk about that fact. Like, just because he signed it, if somebody doesn't understand it, isn't that against his whole thing where you actually have to capitulate? Because isn't the point that you have to understand that that's what you're doing, right? And so that's also part of the whole thing, is that with Ellen, she makes some comment like she didn't know, she didn't understand, and she was very young, and he took advantage of that. And again, along those themes of exploitation and um predation, but to me it's like I don't even know how that contract would stand because he has no idea what he's signing. But you know, that's all good. I don't want to poke holes in too much, but maybe we should talk about, the film as a whole at the beginning versus jump.
Yeah, let's briefly, I think, talk about some of these scenes because there are some, when you start talking about the cinematography, you could also just kind of, that's a whole different parallel conversation for this film. But it starts with a oneer that has been studied a lot, apparently to make this shot. This is the shot where she's basically calling out and waking up Nosferatu. It's a oneer that goes in three different shots in some way, close up to middle to a wide, expansive shot. they were moving walls in the building or in the set where they were shooting it in order to make it happen. It's it's a pretty shot. It's and the lighting in all of these. When if you there's a YouTube video on a channel called From the Frame, Why Nosferatu's Nights Are Different is the name of the video, and it's very much inside baseball in the weeds of lighting and color theory. But it talks about the lighthouse, the Northman, the witch, and this film, and how it's basically the same cinematographer for each one. And when you look at the way that scenes are lit for all of these films, Nosferatu is like the logical conclusion of this philosophy and this approach to using natural light where possible. And I just think it's a beautiful film. It opens up with that beautiful shot, and then there's other really good sequences of shots. And I think of all the shot sequences in this film, I enjoyed the ones of them walking through the streets of Visburg, I think the most because they're the most dynamic in a way.
Yeah, the look of this film is very interesting where you have a color film, but the color is so desaturated that when it gets dark, it essentially turns into black and white or like blue and white almost. And so I think that what you're responding to in the Visberg stuff, Stuart, is that it's like kind of the only,
Colorful
yeah, it's only
scenes.
only time when there's like a kind of color and also where you get this kind of vibrant like cityscape that feels alive and bustling, and then it contrasts later to after the plague is hit, and those same streets are just filled with people just kind of moaning and bleeding everywhere.
It's filled with bustling rats. Come on.
There's lots of bustling 5,000 rats.
This whole introductory sequence where she, is in this despair. She's a teenager or very young. She wants companionship, and she calls out and accidentally invites him in. She has that sequence at the window where he's kind of talking to her in shadow, and you can see his silhouette only, and then she ends up outside on the ground. It's so I thought this was a very effective and spooky opening scene. And it the look of it sets the tone for the entire rest of the film. So I thought this was a really cool introduction to this movie.
Agree.
Yeah. I guess the reason why she's so sad and lonely is A, she's a teenager, B, she's like a psychic. And her relationship with her dad seems to be not the best based on the description she makes later on. But you are kind of just launched in with her. She's crying, she's unhappy, and she's looking for some sort of spirit of. She uses a bunch of different language, guardian angel. A lot of the dialogue, like you said, Kyle, is I guess torn from the 1920s, so it feels archaic already. I did find it, it's like watching Shakespeare almost. It's not quite like to that level, but it's a little bit difficult, more difficult than just vernacular.
It's a little stilted.
I think it's stylized is maybe how I would put it.
Yeah. Um, so she has a pretty negative experience in the backyard. Uh, and then wakes up in bed with her husband Thomas. So you're not even sure if that was a flashback or just a dream. I didn't realize what it was basically until the film was over, I would say, because it seemed like it was just a dream and a continuation of dreams she's been having about this situation. Um, we find out pretty quickly that she and Thomas have just gotten married, that the honeymoon has been too short, that he is going to a job interview. She says after he leaves, he already has the job and he will leave. And I like, here's the thing about Ellen. I keep going back and forth. She seems to be a willing agent of Orlok sometimes, and or at least under his spell, like if that felt like she was reporting out to Orlok.
Uh, it also felt maybe that, and that's like, I think where the line, I think there's an ambiguity there, possibly deliberately, like she's in his thrall and maybe feels helpless. Like she is, because later she definitely tries to convince him not to go. So she's reporting out and seems pretty upset about this idea. And she then acts out later when he talks to her about it. So
I guess it makes sense in the context that she is of two minds about him. There are scenes where physically she looks like she's really into him, but she's saying things like "I abhor you" and "Get away from me" later on in the film. So I guess it's consistent with that, the fact that two she's of two minds, or she's torn, and we don't know to what extent she is acting under her own agency. But I felt like it was a little hard to get a pulse on her because of how, there are scenes where she goes completely bananas later, and then one scene later she's like, oh, prim and proper again, and so it's just there's a lot of back and forth with her. We got to meet Herr Knock, who is played by
Not Ralph Ineson, that's the other guy. He's played by Simon
Simon
McBurry.
McBurney.
McBurry, who is I feel bad that we didn't have his name at hand because he is awesome in this film.
Yeah.
He from the moment he shows up, you're like, something's wrong with this dude.
Most definitely.
And he's very familiar looking because he's been in a million movies. But I'm trying to find if there's one thing that I would know him from the most. But I think he might just be kind of one of these character actors. He's been in Harry Potter films, Last King of Scotland,
I
all kinds of
recognized
stuff.
him from Mission Impossible. He's in several of the Mission Impossible films, and he's also in uh, Tinker Tailor Soldier Spy, the
Hmm.
Thomas Alfredson Tinker Tailor Soldier Spy, which is another one of my favorite films.
I love that film.
So he's like the Renfield analog for this version of the story. I will also say, coming into this, I'm not like a Bram Stoker scholar, and I'd never seen the original Nosferatu, but the plot of this movie is so well known that I guess one of the things I felt in watching it was people criticize the zombie genre for not doing anything new. And here I am watching a story that I literally know exactly what's going to happen because, or I feel like I do because I've seen it in so many different ways that it feels a little bit odd to be like, oh yeah, okay, so this guy's going to be Renfield and he's going to be, a howling lunatic.
I mean, vampires have gone other places. There's, as we've seen from, Twilight and Sinners and many other franchises over the years. But there's something about this Dracula story that really just keeps drawing people back. In terms of, this is obviously a remake of a story that was essentially ripped off from Dracula to the extent that I think there's, the estate of Bram Stoker was involved in legal action over the original Nosferatu. But
They tried to destroy every copy of the film. Like that
yeah.
was the extent they went to.
uh, so I mean, why do we keep remaking this same, thing over and over again? There's obviously something about the themes and the dynamics here that we find really compelling and interesting. I guess it's just keeps coming back to this kind of origin text. And zombies, for all that, they don't have an origin text in that way.
Yeah, I just find it, yeah, it's curious. Like some to think of the criticism that we've seen, AJ, about our beloved genre, and then to be watching almost, stroke for stroke a single story being retold. It's like
Stoker
every Spider-Man origin story you've ever seen, right?
or Stoker for Stoker. It's I do think that this is one of those things that is just embedded, especially maybe it was the timing, maybe it was because this was one of the first films, and then it just kind of had legs and people just like to reimagine it. Agree. I think that this is definitely one of those tropes we see over and over and over again and reinterpreted. But there's also been a lot of different variations that go away from this, which was a little bit of my point about the fact that this is, a monstrous vampire versus the Twilight or even the Interview with a Vampire genre. Just people coming up with their own mythologies or mythos and their own canon for it. But this is one that definitely is, I think, just very much embedded in just the zeitgeist and the psyche of so many. Because you say, I think generally you say vampire, and this. is probably the immediate go-to in
Yeah.
terms of the story.
I
And
guess it's like Frankenstein in that respect, which is another suffers from the same sort of retelling of the same story.
and I mean, one of the things with Interview with a Vampire was that, you know, I know some Anne Rice came up with her own, basically her own mythology for them and her own rules, and some of them still held true and were rooted in this, but she did her own thing she was reinterpreting in a different way. And so it is kind of fascinating to see how this is retreaded. I think you're right, like a lot more, but it's kind of I actually really like, despite some of my issues with this, I really enjoyed seeing how this was unfolding, and especially with this level of filmmaking,
Hmm.
that was a different idea. And then I'm wondering if some of it's also just because of the whole idea. I mean, it's not like vampirism or the idea of that um was still embedded in different types of folklore and mythology. There's like vampire ideas in so many like folk tales, and then this was the one that kind of um was Dracula like one of the first, like this was probably the idea of like, I don't want to say a penny dreadful, but this kind of, I don't want to say pulpy morality tales, but it kind of was one of the ones that had a wider range than other things did at the time. I'm not, I don't have enough to
No.
go on here, but that could be.
Oh, Frankenstein at the very least predates Dracula. I think Mary Shelley wrote that, oh, I want to say like probably 50 or 60 years before Bram Stoker wrote Dracula. So I think that there were people kind of playing around with, these kind of monster science fiction-y kind of stuff earlier than that. And Frankenstein famously, like Mary Shelley got together with like three or four other people and they all tried to write kind of these disturbing morality tales, and it ended up I'm forgetting the exact origins, but they ended up having like several different seminal texts coming out of this little competition they were trying to have.
Right, but Dracula, what I'm saying is that Dracula was coming from like the whole like Vlad the Impaler legend that was already
Oh, I see. Yeah.
places. It's not like he came up with that out of the blue.
Hmm.
So that was already kind of there, and then this was like, okay, well, this is the canon. So I don't know. I think um it's kind of interesting to explore those things, and you know, it's I think I would expect that things would have had more originality later, but
The
it's just a different, it's interesting to think about it.
the retreading of the story beats don't bother me, Stuart, but what does bother me with vampires in general is I can never quite nail down the rules of vampirism.
Hmm.
And this just bothers me from like a kind of world building perspective. It's like zombies are very easy. You get bitten by a zombie, you turn into a zombie. Like end of story. Because zombies are tales about the horde, and vampires are tales about these kind of loner, singular figures. And so it's like, when do you turn into a vampire? Well, if you're bitten by a vampire, like sometimes you die, and then sometimes you turn into a vampire, and I guess the vampire can kind of like choose oftentimes which direction that goes. There's a it's a little unclear, and so there's actually, I guess, except for Orlok himself, no reanimating in this movie. And as far as I can tell, none of the people that Orlok drinks the blood of themselves turn into vampires. So I always get a little bit distracted trying to figure out every time, okay, vampires in this world, how do they work? What's the mechanism of action here? That kind of stuff.
Hmm. Yeah, and I think this movie actually introduces in the first act another vampire that we're not sure what his origin stories were or how he ties into everything. So that was kind of weird, but we'll get there. Because first, we have to go to Aaron Taylor Johnson's house, Friedrich Harding. Uh, and it's funny that he's in this film in a way because we're going to be watching him in 2 weeks in 28 years later. Very different sort of character, I assume. He plays this Nepo baby shipping magnate who is nice but kind of a douchebag to Thomas, and but very generously agrees to take in Ellen while Thomas goes away on his trip to the Carpathian Alps. And his two daughters are doomed from the very beginning because they don't stop talking about the monsters under their bed.
I mean, come on.
That's just it for them. Sorry, girls. I am glad with the way that they eventually did resolve that. It was very tastefully done. It wasn't. I mean, it was horrifying, but it was not egregious.
It was pretty horrifying.
It's horrifying, yeah, but
Yeah, I mean, we'll get to it later, but
yeah.
the way that he just kind of like chucks the kid to the side and it's like thump.
I know.
Uh-huh.
I was like, oh, that's awful.
Like we're going there.
Yeah. All right. But so we meet this family. I feel like you get weird vibes about Friedrich. I'm not quite sure how to put a finger on it, and maybe that's like a good nuanced performance by Aaron Taylor Johnson. But how did you guys feel about him?
I I thought out of everybody, he felt a little like I don't know. I didn't find him totally believable in this role. But maybe that's just again because of the stylized dialogue. And maybe I just didn't like how he interacted with all the women in this, and especially later.
Yeah,
Um,
especially
but
later. But you
yeah,
kind of get a sense that that's coming. Like I feel like you always know that that's out there in a way.
yeah,
Mostly because
there's a
because of
level.
him stepping into that role for Thomas and being like, "Sure, I'll take care of your wife while you're away." I was like, "Oh God, here we go." It's just something about it. I was just waiting for the other shoe to
There's a
drop.
level of creep with him that I think and that's probably deliberate.
But what's so interesting is anytime Ellen touches him, he like physically reacts to her touching him, like throwing her off of him, you know? She only does it a couple times. She like puts a hand on his arm and he rips his arm away. I thought that was I mean, I'd never understood what it was about, even when, Ellen's asking him later, like, why do you hate me? And he's like, how dare you? But I thought that was a pretty interesting thing about their relationship that I was actually concerned that he was going to try and start something with her when she was living under his roof, but in fact, it was the opposite. He absolutely detests her for some reason.
I, I liked Aaron Taylor Johnson's performance here as Friedrich. I thought he has one of those faces that you look at and you think like, oh, this is a modern person's face. So that's kind of tough when those people can't transplant well to period things, but I moved past it. You know, Friedrich, he is this person who never had to work for anything, and so he and Thomas have this interesting conversation where basically Friedrich says, "Oh, I'm jealous of you. You get to go like make your fortune." And Thomas says, "Well, I'm jealous of you because I want all the nice stuff that you have." And so I think Friedrich, he's just kind of frivolous. He doesn't necessarily work very hard. He inherited a lot of the stuff that the wealth that he has, and I think he really only sees his wife Anna as like essentially a vessel for producing children. He talks a lot about how he has all these children, he has all these girls, he wants more children, and so he's kind of supposed to be this like stand-in for the complacency, I think, of the citizens of Visburg who are, you know, just sitting there fat and happy with no real appreciation for the evils that lurk out in the world. And that's why he's so continuously dismissive of Ellen's warnings and the things that she's going to say. So he's a stand-in for the greater society that's kind of fat happy and completely unaware of what's coming for them. And I enjoy his performance here. I think he does a good job with it.
Okay. Yeah. Um, so that night after they get there and Thomas and Ellen kind of make up, she kind of backpedals a bit from telling him about her dream where she's like, I was at our wedding and everybody was dead and I was the happiest I've ever been. And he's like, please don't say these things to me. This is disturbing. It's just the first of many disturbing conversations they have.
But she also says, "Don't go. Like you don't, don't do this to me." And he's like, "No, I'm going to go anyway."
Yeah. But so that night she cuts a lock of her hair and puts it in a locket that he's going to take with him the next day. This locket comes in a lot during the film as Orlok's little huffing device. Um, and we also get a scene of Herr Canuck nude carving things, and now we understand more complete. I mean, we knew because of his weird cackling in the last scene, but now we know for sure he has a compact with Orlok and has sent Thomas to his doom.
If you were ever in doubt, he says it out loud.
Yeah, just in case you weren't sure. Now you know, and he does it inside a like a pentagram sort of symbol with a bunch of candles, and yeah, bad mojo happening. There is a really beautiful shot that happens the next day after Thomas leaves, makes his farewells. That horseback shot through the countryside with the windmills. I just thought it was so gorgeous. Again, it's like it's daytime, it's full, it's vibrant, it's full of color. But I logged it as like, wow. And I don't know if that was practical or if that was CG, but it was just such a beautiful scene. And then we go quite quickly into the snowy mountains, and him looking down at this village full of, again, like quite vibrant scene of people playing instruments. But that turns weird very fast because he starts walking into this village, and all of these Romani people playing instruments and dancing are just not stopping making eye contact with him. And maybe this is one of those scenes where you guys would have been like, nope, not going to stay at this tavern.
Mm.
I mean, there's a strong, the characters allude to it as well. There's a strong kind of element of fate and doom amongst this story, and you just get the sense that, you know, Thomas just can't stop moving forward here. He wants to, he knows that the things that are happening are wrong and should not be happening, and yet he cannot stop himself from proceeding. And this is where the little kernel of truth is in what Orlok says to Ellen later. You know, we talked about the covenant and how it's basically a BS contract because he doesn't understand what he's signing. He thinks it's part of the documents for the house purchase, etc. But he's already been begged not to come, and he knows something's wrong from this entire section, and yet he keeps pushing forward out of his desire for that better life, his lust for, gold and status and material possessions and that kind of stuff. So he is in a way making that choice or not being strong enough, I guess, to reject the, you know, um, the deal that's being presented to him here. So I really think that this is the most effective stuff in the movie is basically here through um, when he escapes from the castle, but especially this little scene in the village. You just get such a sense of existential dread from everything that's happening, and the idea that Thomas has wandered into this world that he just cannot possibly understand.
And that's all underscored when he, stops walking, gets to the front of the inn. The man with the pipe just starts laughing, and then everybody's laughing at him. It's yeah, you're just like, okay, yeah, you're screwed. He goes inside the inn, and it's even worse somehow in there. Like it's so dark and smoky. Apparently, the old lady who shows him to his room is like TikTok famous in Romania, which I thought was that was just surprising on several levels.
It's a
She,
surprisingly modern element to have associated with this movie.
yeah. Uh, so she's like, don't, she also tells him, don't go, beware the shadow, but she's saying it all in Romanian, and I'm not sure that Thomas speaks any, so might have been lost on him, but he couldn't have failed to pick up on all of the praying and the spitting, which is the kind of thing people do to ward off evil spirits. Uh, and then he gets to witness that the procession that night of the Romani people following a naked girl on a horse. And this is that scene I was talking about earlier where they stake a vampire in the cemetery. Uh, and so he sees that happen, and he does ask Orlok about it later. But what do you guys think is the deal with the vampire, other than just showing us, it shows us the way that the story could have gone in another way, but where did this vampire come from? What's he important for?
I mean, I think it's just important to show that the corruption is that it's not just this is something that this they're very much aware of. That this is the way they take care of business, and they know exactly what Orlok is and are trying to warn him against. But there's also a little bit of a thing with them where he's an outsider, and so they're kind of like, well, you're on your own if you're doing this. So I think it's to show what is normal and part of their lives. And this is such a foreign concept to him as somebody coming from the modern world. This probably seems incredibly strange and terrifying, and also like this is the uncivilized world, so to speak. So that's where I think it was kind of going. And also, I think it's a little bit of a warning sign about what would happen if Orlok gets out of this area, if he goes to the town that they're from, if he gets access to other people. So he's a little bit contained. They know how to deal with him, but nobody else really is aware or believes this if he gets into the the world that Ellen is in. Um, Although obviously Willem Dafoe, that character has some knowledge of it, but it's everybody is very skeptical of that kind of mystical, supernatural idea.
I took it a little differently. Later when Thomas is in Orlok's castle, he mentions this ritual to him, and Orlok says he gets very angry, and he says something of the the pagan rituals of these people must be confusing to you, and then he kind of yells like, "Don't talk to me anymore about this." And so I took this as there is, another vampire who is somehow being at least controlled. Maybe they have to, stab him in the heart with this stake, once a month or something on the full moon or, something like that. And what it really should be is an indication to Thomas that these people know what the rules of these evil beings are and that he should leave because he doesn't. They're familiar and he's not. And so,
Hmm.
Well,
um,
but wouldn't you think he would have done that day, and especially when he sees the empty everything, and he's just like, it'd be a good idea just to continue on.
But it doesn't
yeah,
help that they stole his horse overnight.
I
And
they
it also
did.
seems like the proprietor of the tavern and everybody else who was there is also gone. Like maybe something else has even happened in this in the village.
Orlok kind of warps the reality around him, as we'll see later. When Thomas is in the castle, he sees, statues turning to look at him and things like that. So I think there's a possibility that essentially everything that happens to him in this village is some sort of hallucination or dream or something that Orlok implants in him.
Hmm.
But the way that I took it was basically these villagers have lived in the shadow of this great evil for a long time. They mostly leave it alone. When it infects their lives, they have mechanisms for dealing with it. And this is kind of a part of their day-to-day day-to-day world in a way. Um, so that's kind of how I took it, but I think it is an ambiguous scene.
So, but like undeterred by the loss of his horse, he basically then climbs the mountain on foot. And that leads us to this crossroads scene, which I think is one of these standout scenes from the film. The way it's lit, the way it's shot. Do you guys have some thoughts about how he ends up, or what he does on the, or what happens in that scene at the crossroads in the woods?
I think this is the one where Nicholas Holt says yes, and this is where my character says this is fine. Accept it. Just accept.
Best shot of the film, or I guess it's actually two shots, or a shot and a reverse shot. But Thomas walking down the lane alone, snow falling above, and then the mysterious driverless coach showing up and the door just swinging open. I just loved every single thing about the way that this was portrayed.
Yeah, it's pretty iconic, but it's one of several iconic shots also in this film. That the fact that's one of the things that draws your attention to the cinematography, just being very next level. But also the alarm bells should really be just blasting Thomas's face off because like he shuts his eyes when the horse and carriage appear to be about to run him over. When he opens his eyes, it's parked neatly across the road and the door is swinging open silently. But he gets in and rides to the castle. Then we have another, what I would say is an iconic Dracula shot, which is of the carriage driving on the cliffside road toward the castle, which is lit by the sky in the distance. I feel like I've seen this exact shot in maybe even in Bram Stoker's Dracula with Gary Oldman. I feel like it is in that shot, in that movie also.
I with the crossroads or in the
Now
castle?
that subsequently the one where he's in the carriage riding on the street, but it's like on the cliffside road
Oh, and you
toward the
see the
castle.
castle like in the distance.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure
Yeah.
that that is a that's maybe just like an obligatory shot you have to have when you're telling a story about Dracula.
You got to show the castle.
But
You got
it's that carriage on the cliffside road with castle illuminated by moon. It's yeah,
bolts.
okay.
Mm.
It's all the ingredients were there. But then there's like three wolves chasing the carriage, and I'm wondering, were those real wolves? Probably, because everything in this movie is real. It's
And
crazy.
wolves, and behind them, 5,000 rats.
Yeah. So he arrives at the castle. And it's more like this is all this like nighttime night shooting stuff that's lit so ridiculously. Everything is basically in gray and blue and white. Um, let's talk about meeting Orlok and his whole thing. First of all, beautiful mustache. This is a presentation of this kind of character that is totally new. It's great. I really appreciated their approach, dressing him like a Hungarian noble or Romanian noble from whatever time period he's supposed to be in, 16th century maybe. Uh, like it just it worked for me really well. Um, and then Skarsgård's approach to language and mostly to language because he doesn't move that much by design. Pretty impactful stuff. What did you guys think?
I thought it was really well done, but it almost, read to me as like a construct, like he was almost in a costume, which he kind of is to some extent. And I thought that this was an interesting interpretation. The throat thing is super creepy and weird, and his whole physicality is, especially when you see what he actually looks like, makes so much sense. So I actually really appreciated how much thought went into the presentation of how he was, just how he is incredibly like just terrifying. Once again, though, Thomas, why would you stay in this room? This is like from the get-go. This guy is there's something off, friend. There's something off. Like just run. Um, I don't know, like the tolerance for that. What is to me, what is clearly somebody who is not not normal, and if he is human, there's something very dangerous about him. I just think Thomas should have just turned tail. I get why he didn't, but I think realistically he probably wouldn't have been staying in that castle another night.
I love the design of Nosferatu in this film. Like no notes. I love the mustache. I love the way that his like flesh is like basically falling off of his bones, and he has all these boils on his head and stuff like that.
Yeah, he's corrupt.
The performance by Skarsgård here is fabulous. This is something where I feel like there actually was some controversy here, but I loved this Orlok. I loved that he seemed like a powerful physical presence. I mean, his footsteps, I mean, the sound design in this movie is insane, first of all. But his footsteps sound like an elephant or something walking through this castle. Like they're so loud and thudding. And the original Nosferatu in the 1922 film is this kind of spindly little dude. Like he's got big ears and long fingers, and he's like this skinny, kind of crabby looking guy. And this Orlok is looks like he could mess you up physically, and that I kind of appreciated that.
And he's big.
He's
Like,
big.
The heavy footfalls is also reminiscent of Midnight Mass, which had a similar approach to making its vampire or its monster feel impactful that way. If you recall, when
Hmm.
he would walk around, you'd hear his footsteps kind of thud. But yeah, Yeah, cool. I very, very, very good. I also kind of kept thinking that this isn't what I expected it to look like, and that this was going to be like you said, HA, maybe this is a proxy, and the real Baldy with the pointy ears is going to show up later. But no, this was what they stuck with, and I liked it. I appreciated it more and more as the film went on. Things go very badly in the castle, as you always expect them to. He cuts himself because cutting bread, he cuts himself. And then the look on Nicholas Holt's face as he gets transported to the fireplace, sees the statue looking at him, and then looks over and sees Orlok walking toward him, and then kind of passes out. Wakes up on the floor the next day, face down in the living room on the flagstones. Man, you're feeling bad for this guy.
Yeah, and it's also the whole castle and this set was so just falling apart and like dusty and decrepit and the like it's like I feel like the reflection of the corruption in Orlok is reflected in this castle and just the lighting and how terrifying it is to just walk around because it's not even just, there's like a lot of dark hallways and it's even the place where even the bedroom he's staying is pretty scary. And not like a ton of light, obviously. But it's all everything is falling down apart, deteriorating, and it, you know, you can feel how cold it must be in this castle.
Oh yeah.
It's like just even watching it, what a miserable existence it must be, even just to stay there and then to wake up as he does, just and see the bite on him. Um,
To his credit here, he tries to run away.
does
And Nicholas Holt's running away run is pretty funny. I enjoyed watching him scampering around the castle. I don't know why he goes into that crypt. He's trying to find an exit, but he's like, maybe these dark stairs that go down are the way out. But actually, he then also, to his credit, finds the sarcophagus, finds the sleeping body of Orlok, and tries to stake him. It doesn't work because Orlok like just catches the pickaxe or whatever. We get treated to a scene of Orlok standing up in his birthday suit. Fun fact: Nicholas Holt kept that prosthetic penis as his like going away gift from the movie.
Nicholas Holt kept it.
Yeah,
That's funny.
he's like, I had to look at this thing for a whole day, probably. Yeah, keeps it in a framed case. I think. You
I
know,
I did not see that detail.
Oh,
you know,
you didn't notice him hanging dong? He was
maybe
he
that
was
was
No,
in
very
the extended
prominent. Yeah.
cut.
no, I didn't see that Nicholas Holt decided to keep it.
Yeah.
Okay. See, I was like, I don't know how you can miss that.
Man,
It's very obvious.
Another similarity to Midnight Mass, there was a sensuality to the way that that monster fed, and there is here too, where Orlok feeds on Thomas that the night after the attack or immediately after the attack on his sarcophagus. There's also just another beautifully framed shot of when he makes Thomas open the door to his bedroom, and in the hallway he's standing framed by the wolves. I love that shot too. So beautiful.
One thing that I appreciate about Eggers, he can pull out a jump scare when he needs to, and there are a few in this film, but he understands better than almost any other filmmaker currently working the power of a disturbing image that you just hold on and don't cut away from and isn't something that you just see a quick flash of. And I think that the vampire feeding on Thomas is a perfect example of that. Like it is so disturbing and revolting, and you want to look away, but you can't, and the camera doesn't let you. It probably lasts like a good 8 to 10 seconds, which is a long time for a static shot like that. Um, and I just think he does that better than almost anybody else.
Yeah, it's gross.
Yep.
Super
Uh,
gross and sensual. He's kind of like almost kind of like humping him
he's
while
humping
he's
him for
drinking.
sure. Yeah,
It's
there's
yeah.
Yeah.
I'm sure that's probably also why Nicholas Hoult was like, I need that dong. It's it was basically bouncing off of my thighs for an hour while I shot that scene. Um, it's a lot. He also only bites people on the chest, this vampire, which is apparently related to some sort of folklore that I think that Eggers had seen that they bite about near the heart instead of out of the throat.
I have to say, I like it from an imagery perspective. I don't understand it from a uh, I don't know, like biological perspective or an anatomical perspective. Like the vein in the neck is a very big vein and it's very close to the surface. There's a
Yeah.
rib cage here between,
How do
you
you
know,
distend your jaw wide enough to be able to bite a chest? This is
I
an
don't know,
old
like,
conversation for me and
like
HA.
where they're showing those bite marks, like I'm pretty sure that even though the heart is under there, like on the surface, it's just a bunch of like little blood vessels, the same way
Hmm.
that it would be in any other non-vein place on your body. So, or arterial place on your body. So I think Nick makes more sense, but it's a nice change of pace here.
I thought it was more to, it was the hard thing, but also to maybe hide the fact that they were getting bitten. So
Hmm.
they have to pull their shirt way down to show the bite marks all the time.
Yeah, perhaps. The scene immediately after this is one of the most egregious anti-Ellen scenes where we meet Dr. Severs, played by, oh God, I'm terrible at remembering people's names when I need to.
That's Ralph Ineson,
Ralph Ineson with the most gravelly voice of all gravel voices.
and he is the uh, patriarch in The Witch,
Yeah.
and it is a very different kind of role for him than this, but he is excellent in that movie.
He ends up being very empathetic and a sympathetic character in this film, but he starts off by saying like, so her main problem is she has too much blood, and she should sleep in her corset for her womb and recirculation, and you can always just tie her down if she gets too crazy. Like this, he just it's like a triple punch of just bad medical
We're not
advice.
good. Let's just knock her out with some chloroform or
Oh
whatever.
yeah, and then he just holds the ether to her face until she passes out completely. Yeah, it's a fun scene of medicine. But that's kind of a brief, it's just to show that things are continuing to go downhill back home. We've also had scenes of Ellen talking to Anna about, do you ever feel like you're not alive or you're just a doll? And poor Anna, Friedrich's wife, is like, no, don't, God, Jesus, I don't.
And at some points, it was like, oh, I'm just being so silly. It's like, if your friend says some of the things that she is saying, I would not term that as being silly.
Honestly, Anna is such, like, nobody deserves Anna in their life. She's such a saint, quite like her in this film. Certainly Friedrich doesn't deserve her. And she's a good friend to Ellen and a good mom. Um,
Mostly, she also kind of dismisses Ellen's warnings, but
what are you supposed to do? Like, what are Ellen's warnings? Like, do you feel like a doll?
the devil is coming and we all must flee. I guess
Yeah,
that is
like
a
what are
little
you supposed to
difficult
do with
to.
that? And where do you go to escape from the devil? Like this keeps coming back in this movie. They're like, we're gonna get out of town. That'll put a stop to this whole thing. It's like leaving. No, dude.
Yeah.
He's the devil. He's gonna find you. He's been able to leave his castle
He's been able to find you like while he's been in Transylvania.
in
So
your dreams. Yeah. So
Emma Corrin, who plays Anna, plays a very different role in Deadpool versus Wolverine, but she had kind of a fun 2024, I guess.
oh cool. I don't
She was
remember.
Cassandra Nova in Deadpool versus Wolverine.
Uh, I don't remember that character, but
She was kind of the main villain. She stuck fingers in people's heads.
oh, okay.
Yeah. Very different kind of movie.
Very different movie. Um, we then have another scene back in Transylvania of Thomas waking up with wolves in his bedroom, and it's kind of funny. He like there's wolves jumping into his bed. He gets out of bed, closes the curtains on his four-poster bed, and then jumps out the window. Basically, I don't know why he was like, oh, if I the wolves can't go through curtains. But I don't. I actually, did he fall into the river, or was he just like hanging out?
I think he fell. I don't think he proactively jumped, but I can't remember off the top of my head.
Oh,
It looked very like a very small ledge covered in snow, so I wouldn't be surprised if he had fallen. But that's how he escapes from Orlok's clutches. Couldn't get out the front door the day before. And back in Visburg, Ellen is freaking out because she hasn't heard from Thomas. This is a scene where Friedrich is kind of brought in to handle her, and he doesn't really have much patience for her. And then she collapses at the seaside. We also get more scenes now of Sievers at the hospital where there's a new patient who is Herr Knock, who has been eating raw sheep. There's a disgusting scene of him putting an actual a pigeon's head in his mouth. And then I really hope that this was CG.
me too.
I have to say, I appreciated the rapidity of Herr Connacht's, transition to insanity. There's no like, oh, let's pretend like this guy's normal for a few more scenes. It's like, no, he's normal for exactly how long as he needs to be to send Thomas on his quest, and then he goes completely off the deep end.
Yeah.
But he's kind of the first sign that, you know, that things are wrong for the people of Visburg.
Sievers is a very busy character in the rest of this film. Him and once Von Franz gets introduced, they're in every scene, it feels like. And sometimes they go from being attacked at their hospital, in the case of Sievers, to the next scene, he's just like hanging out in Friedrich's living room, like maybe later that day. So he's had a terrible day, has Dr. Sievers. But then he's like doing house calls for Ellen to try and figure out what's going on with her. Uh, and then we also have got scenes now of Thomas being recovered by these nuns who are like kind of trying to heal him or bring him back to health or exercise his potential demonic possession. But he's too busy. He's got to go. We get the lore that he needs to be in his native earth. The nuns seem really disturbed that Orlok is planning to leave. And we also have like the whole last voyage of the Demeter thrown in here, AJ. We watched a whole movie about just that.
Well, I know that's what I was actually thinking as I was watching these scenes. I'm like, look, they didn't even need a whole movie. They just
Clearly, you could do it in like 5 minutes and just three scenes or whatever. But we watched an hour and a half of it. That, yeah, I mean, this was a pretty decent telling of that story too. You got the same sense. There were, you know, it's plague, people starting to throw up,
it
and
was
then
pretty
yeah,
bad, but I thought it was well edited and that piece of the storytelling was very effective. I mean, they did it just so efficiently, and then it brings it right up to the point where I thought the imagery with the ship, when they're, with all the rats on it and then everybody's like, it's a plague ship, um, was done very well. I thought that shot was so good. And again, knowing that those are probably real rats.
yeah. Now you know.
I can share that, just yesterday I was rained down to catch the subway and I had to jump over a rat that was hanging out on the steps, which caught me a little off guard. So, you know, one rat versus however many this is, I don't know how I would manage that. And
That's
then to have them in the
New
streets.
New York rats. They just don't care, do they?
Well, usually, I mean, they're at this particular stop because there's like people dump a lot of food there. So, like, they're always looking for a treat. And he was pretty excited about the bag of chips that he was in, which is why I didn't see him at first. So, I guess I should be happy I saw him and didn't step on him. So, but yeah, real rats. Mm. I'm not bothered by them as long as they stay on their part of the stairs. That's all.
That's theirs now.
Yep.
So we meet Von Franz at some point in here. I can't remember
Yeah.
exactly what it
It's
is.
right. It's basically right after it's right before the ship gets there, I think.
There's an interesting relationship between these kind of gothic horror stories and camp. where, you know, we as modern movie audiences are coded to read things that are overwrought or over the top like this as camp. Basically, we don't take them seriously anymore, whereas a audience watching a movie like this in the 20s or the 30s or the 40s may not have taken those elements as camp. They may have taken them essentially completely straightforwardly, terrifying as they were originally intended to be. And a lot of this movie does a really good job walking this line where, yes, the elements are highly stylized and over the top, but they don't read as campy or silly. And Willem Dafoe as Von Franz is the closest this movie has to like just a straight up campy
I was gonna say,
character.
are you trying to say he's not camp? Because he's
No, he
camp
he
in
is definitely camp, and I love him, and I love some of the
hair.
lines that he gets in this. But he's a little bit different in terms of his tone than the rest of the film is, which I just think is interesting.
Well, I think it's also because he's coming in and they've already commented on him and the fact that he got kicked out of the university because he believes in the occult and all this other things, these other things. So there's definitely, I feel like they're trying to set the table for the fact that his ideas are outside of the norm, at least of what these civilized people are. And then he comes in with all his eccentricities and his outfits and all the things, and he's not subtle at all.
Mhm.
And it's interesting because they do defer to his authority in a way that I was a little bit surprised about, given how they were talking to him before. I
Well, he
think,
establishes his authority when they go to his house, and he, without being told anything, tells Friedrich exactly what the problem is. He's like, "Oh, there's a woman living in your house who's gone completely bananas."
well,
Right? Like, so
but
that's he establishes credibility right away by just doing a psychic trick.
he does, but there's still, I don't know. It's just interesting to me, given his delivery, that give- they're okay with that.
Yeah, I think it's that plus the warning that, oh, he's an eccentric. We're gonna have to be on the lookout for eccentric behavior, and then he follows he follows through with that, and he mostly provides good answers until Friedrich does eventually like just decide that nah, it's you don't know what you're talking about.
Just a
This is the part of the movie where I felt like it kind of dragged for me. Because it takes a while to get to the culmination in the third act. But here we've just got a lot of scenes of like the doctors, Franz and Sievers and Friedrich having these meetings and talking and agitatedly, and Ellen going in and out of insane and epilepsy. And Thomas shows up, and then they kind of switch positions where he's suddenly sick and she's fine. He's not suddenly sick. He's been sick, but now like she seems to recover as soon as he gets back, and I think that that's obviously by design, but it's again part of this like seesawing of the Ellen character that I had trouble finding my footing with. And
One thing
yeah,
that I'll just take this chance to discuss um, is Lily Rose Depp's performance, which I was prepared to not appreciate because I think I had this idea of her as kind of a, you know, Nepo baby shouldn't really be famous type of person. And certainly Johnny Depp has, flushed his uh, career and reputation down the toilet in recent years. And so I was very prepared to, not find her compelling in this. And I was completely wrong. She is extremely affecting, and the physicality of this performance is exceptional. I mean, the fits that she has are terrifying, and there are times later when she uh, is either possessed or not possessed, or it just everything that she did in this film really, really worked for me. And again, the style of the film, the kind of throwback nature of the film, because it's emulating these old-fashioned movies, it's essentially permission. Actually, it's almost forcing the actors to go as big as humanly possible, because they have to match the energy and intensity of the style of the film, and so there are actresses who would have been more restrained with this, and she really throws herself into it in a way that I thought was awesome. So I just had to point that out.
No, I thought she was excellent. And the physicality of the fit is something that, I mean, it's terrifying. Not just in these scenes that we see it really, to me, it's like this is like the peak of what she's doing, and we've seen some of it before. But even when she's on the beach, with Anna and just has like this kind of immediate fit, which is kind of interesting because apparently they've seen her do this before, or have these things before, but then that leads up to like she's just, leading up to the performance here. I think she did an incredible job just all throughout this. I thought she was awesome.
Yeah.
So I don't know. And I say this based upon how disturbed I was watching it because it was incredibly disturbing.
Yeah. I wondered how in some of those scenes, especially one of the later ones between her and Thomas, that turns into a very disturbing
Yes.
interaction between them. When she's sticking her tongue out and her eyes are rolled up in the back of her head, like how much of that was really her, but I think a
Yeah, I
lot
was
of
trying to
it,
figure out if they'd CG'd on the whites of the eyes there.
yeah, I think a lot of it was her. I think, and when she's having her seizures, I'm like, did she have to rehearse her body movements? Because they're insanely like prolonged and repeated. I would have needed to be in traction after some of these scenes.
Oh yeah. I was like, oh, that her back must just be I mean, it's very, very physical in terms of, I think she had to have had like a trainer and a choreographer, obviously, but how do you not do damage to your body doing some of those things? Um, so yeah.
Yeah, we get a jump scare around here also where Anna puts the girls to bed and then walks out in the hallway. Orlok is now in Visburg, so we're expecting him to show up in some way.
We get the amazing shot of his hand, the shadow of his hand, swooping out over the town, which
Yeah,
is a callback to some imagery from the original film.
yeah, he leads with his hand shadow, that's for sure, in many
I was
scenes.
I was hoping there would be some shadow puppets here. No such luck.
But what we do have is the jump scare of Ellen appearing behind Anna. She's just like walked up right behind her in the dark to then ask her in like a nice little prim way, "Can I sleep with you tonight? I don't want to sleep with my sick husband." I thought that was kind of funny,
Hmm.
but also scary because you're not sure about Ellen.
Nope.
So there's still a lot of like meetings with Franz. I think while that's happening, Franz and Sievers and Friedrich are all just hanging out in Franz's nasty house. Friedrich isn't happy to be there. They want to. He's Franz is constantly just trying to explain to them like there's a demon. His name's Nosferatu, or he's a Nosferatu. I'm not sure if that's his name or his category. Uh, and we need to do something about it, but he doesn't really know what to do.
Well, while she's sleeping with Anna, she
Yeah,
gets up from the bed and goes to the window, and then he's suddenly there inside the room. And that's when they have their conversation where Nosferatu basically says, your husband abandoned you. She's trying to stay very steadfast in terms of her faithfulness to Thomas. And he says, he signed you over. He sold you to me. Like, you're mine now. And she's like, no, 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 no. And that's when he kind of gives her, again, that ultimatum that, like, when you give yourself to me, like, you have to, like, do it freely or something. Um, or again, here's the coercion part of it. I'm going to kill everyone you love, and I think she awakens at that time and finds that Anna's covered with the rats who are biting her all over.
Franz has decided that Canuck is the key in a way. They find his secret temple in his office. And is that the book that that he's reading that he finds in which he finds basically the answer, the stuff about the maiden and the cock crowing?
Yes, I
Is
think he finds that in Canuck's office.
yeah. So that's kind of where he's not wrong. The Canuck was the key to the problem.
And then somewhere in here, Von Franz has the best line of like the film or something, which is basically like he says something to the effect of like, I've seen horrors that would make Isaac Newton crawl back into his mother's
Yes.
womb, talking about, how science cannot explain the horrifying nature of what they're seeing. But yeah, there's just a series of escalating scenes here of not only, not only Nosferatu attacking this family in particular, but also kind of this city starts to experience the effects of the rat plague, and more people start to fall ill and come into the hospital where
Mhm.
Sears is working.
Thomas and Ellen have been evicted from the Harding household,
Mm.
which is a great scene because that's where you get to see the impacts on Visburg of the plague, where there's bodies lying around and people screaming and burning in the streets. It's pretty good stuff. Thomas and Ellen have that one really disturbing scene that I don't know that we need to talk about too much,
Um,
or do we?
well, I think there's a couple of things in this scene that are really important. I actually think it's like one of the most important scenes of the film. Um, One is that she fully gets out her resentment to him of the choices that he made, leaving when she told him not to, pursuing these kind of materialistic things over, you know, um, just being with her and being happy. She asks him like, "What has it gotten you? Have you gotten your position? Have you gotten your money? Have you gotten your objects? That kind of stuff. Like, where's all the things you were promised?" And I think it also kind of makes explicit that not only did we read the Orlok's actions with Thomas in kind of this, disturbingly sexual manner, but that he also feels essentially, violated and assaulted by this. He can't even speak about what happened to him at the castle, and then a moment or two later, she kind of throws it back in his face, saying, you were, womanly or something like that. So we have these kind of building layers of shame from each of the characters about their interactions with Orlok. She feels essentially unclean and tainted from when she was a little girl, and he feels essentially violated from what happened to him at the castle, and they lack the capability to work through this trauma in this moment. And it's very tragic and disturbing, and also the acting here from both parties I just think is phenomenal. And then of course it ends in them, you know, attempting to have sex, and then Orlok kind of flashes between them, and they have to, they hurriedly separate, which is again just this sexual trauma interfering with their ability to connect as husband and wife. So, um,
I'm not sure that they were trying to connect as husband and wife when she instigated sex by saying, "You'll never make me feel as good as he does."
well, that's true. I don't know. There's a lot of layers here
There's
of this
some
stuff, but
it's a bad onion.
Also,
I kind of thought that he was trying to prove her wrong or something in that moment. He's saying, "Well, watch me," kind of thing, and then he
Hold my
fails.
beer.
Yeah.
I mean, she has a fit and is a little bit possessed at some point by
That's the
Orlok.
thing. You don't know when she's her and when she's,
So
yeah.
is it her saying that? Is it Orlok saying that? It's hard to know. And regardless, there's one too many people and whatever's going on in this.
Uh-huh. Yeah.
And I think that that's the corruption that he represents. There's also definitely, um, uh, the the fact that she is being so incredibly direct with Thomas about it all is definitely outside of the norms that we're seeing in this society. And so there's a lot going on here. I found it to be incredibly disturbing, and I think that's the intention. But again, the acting here was great, as disturbing as it was, and I think part of my level of unease in watching this is indicative of how strong their performance was, but I don't need to see that again.
It's a tough scene for sure. We and almost immediately after this, we go to the Friedrich Harding household where he's ensorcelled to stay asleep while Orlok starts to murder his daughters. And Anna, has been raving and kind of mad with the plague in her scenes since the rat attack, is the one who gets up with. I think she takes his pistol because he's sleeping with a gun in his hand, which is always smart. And but then walks into the girls' room. That's gone very poorly, and that toss of what I hope was a mannequin happens in this scene. And she doesn't shoot him. I'm not sure it would have made a difference if she had. Uh, but we suddenly then cut to a triple funeral, so we know how that went.
Yeah, so Friedrich has now essentially, had everything taken from him that could be taken from him.
He still has the shipyards, by
That's
Jove.
true. We forgot to mention when von Franz was trying to explain something to him, and he says something like, "I'm a ship man." I just the line reading on that was like really good. That was several scenes ago, but
Yeah,
it was a line that I liked.
yeah. In plain English, please. Which, of course, they don't really do very much of in this film.
No.
But Thomas seems like kind of recovered here. He's still limping a little bit, but basically after that argument with Ellen, he seems mostly back to himself, right? Because he's at the funeral. He has this interaction with Friedrich that he shows him his bite mark, and that basically gets Friedrich on side to join this team of Sievers, Franz, Thomas. But what we do start to see here is that Friedrich is infected with the plague. He's got the plague red marks on his face, and he's not long for this world because he shortly after they make a plan to uh to kill Orlok in his sarcophagus, Friedrich goes and I think makes love to his wife one last time in her mausoleum before he dies.
Yep. There
That
is definitely a shot where Friedrich is in the position.
he's in the position. He might just be going in for a hug, but also he's dead by the time we see him there. But there's a lot of opening of caskets in this movie.
You could say there's too many opening of caskets that should stay closed.
Yeah, yeah. So friends, sorry, yeah. Friedrich is done leaving. There's also a scene here where before that where Ellen and von Franz have this conversation, which kind of sets her on her course, where he's like, "You're the key. You're gonna take care of this, while and make sure your husband isn't distracted from this false hunt because you are the key, and you're gonna put this thing to bed for us." And she's like, "I don't have any secret powers or anything. I just follow my gut." And he's like, "Keep doing it." And that's kind of the key to the film. I guess
Well,
he's
and it's the first instance where she's actually believed by somebody,
yeah, true.
or and somebody that is empowering her and basically saying, "Hey, you are the one who is going to save everyone or make this right, and you have that power." And that is the only person I think in the entire film that actually, I mean, yes, Thomas, now that he's been through it all, but she's never been believed just on the merits and just by someone who like just unequivocally believed what she was saying and didn't put her into some kind of a, oh no, you're just like having these fits and being weak and all this other stuff. So I thought that was kind of a cool and powerful scene between them.
Yeah. As I'm watching it with my modern sensibilities, I've heard Thomas say at least once, like, "Hey, hun, we gotta go. Time is of the essence." And but then she and von Franz have this kind of lengthy, flowery language exchange that seems to go on for 5 more minutes. And I'm like, God, we're trying to go somewhere, guys. What we have next is the trio, the two doctors and Thomas, the two doctors and the real estate agent go to Grunewald Manor and find a casket and then stake whatever's inside. It turns out to be Canuck.
Who is not a vampire. He's just sleeping in the casket.
I guess so. He calls himself the Prince of Rats. He's lost his mind a long time ago.
But he doesn't vomit blood or anything like the other vampire that we saw staked.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But then they burn it all down. You kind of get the sense that Franz has lost his marbles here at the end of this scene because he's like, oh yeah, also he can't deny Ellen's blood, and he starts cackling a little bit as he's burning it all down. He
Yeah, and
also,
so
yeah,
Thomas flees, right? He leaves to go back, and that's when they realize that Orlok is going after Ellen.
yeah, and he's already, yeah, that's already basically happening. She has called out to him. She's dressed up in like wedding gear, and this is the that final couple of scenes that you guys have already talked about being somewhat problematic for this film.
Yep, but you get to see him in his full glory of makeup and everything like that, and he is, whoa, it's pretty gross.
Yeah, his back primarily is nasty.
Thinking about it,
The back of his head.
everything.
Yeah.
Um, but she manages like even so there's a scene of him like starting to look up and she's like, no, keep drinking, but she's pretty close to the edge. Then you hear the cock crow, and I kind of like this version of a vampire's death. It's not, turning into ash or exploding or, any of these weird ways that they have vampires die sometimes. He just kind of well, he starts bleeding out of everything, but it's fairly anticlimactic, but in a way that I appreciate.
Yeah, he doesn't burn in, he doesn't burst into flame or, in the original one, the death of Orlok is really, by modern standards, extremely underwhelming. He just kind of like fades, it's kind of like a cross fade and he just kind of disappears and then there's a little puff of smoke. So this is definitely a lot better. And visually, a lot of what happens here at the end of the film is stunning. I mean, the last shot of the film of Orlok and Ellen dead on the bed with, all of the lilacs surrounding them as the camera slowly pulls back is astonishing in terms of how well composed and horrifying it is. I just still struggle with how much agency we're really thinking that Ellen has here. The film is kind of postulating that, oh, she has figured out how to use, the power that she has kind of inherently, as von Franz tells her, in ancient Egypt, you would have been a pharaoh or something like that, or a priestess. Um, but at the same time, to to utilize that power, she has to essentially give in to Orlok's demands, and so, her action of making sure, of ensuring that he stays with her until the cock crows is what saves everyone. And so there is her power and her agency by utilizing, kind of the hold that she has over him. Um, but there's still something about the fact that this was all coerced and preordained or fated or whatever that I just can't figure out exactly how to make it all ethically, line up or how to read it as a wholeheartedly empowering
Well,
moment.
I
So
don't think it can be read that way because I think ultimately to do whatever this is, she has to capitulate to being assaulted. And it's that is the disturbing part of it. So I think that I can't get on board with that. And
yeah,
so they had taken um a different uh made a different decision in this case, but I think that they were trying to somehow remain true to the original in some sense and slightly turn it, but I don't think that this is empowering at all, in my opinion. I think her decision to make the sacrifice, okay, I can get on board with that, but just what this represents, I don't think that I can't really get there. So, um, but I am glad that I knew in advance of watching it that this was something and that these things were happening throughout the film. I could have guessed based on the original, but it's always hard to know. So I would just say, again, I don't need to watch it again, but I do appreciate the filmmaking aspect of it, if not some of the storytelling decisions.
So how did you guys feel at the end of this? Did you feel disturbed? Did you feel like you'd just been through a piece of art that was going to change your lives forever?
Hmm.
I felt disturbed. I felt impressed. But I also felt a little let down or disappointed. Like it doesn't. quite stick the landing. There's many, many things here that I love, but it doesn't quite stick the landing. And I think actually, in some ways, the ways that it doesn't stick the landing might be in trying to take this newer, fleshed out, expanded version of Ellen and cram her into the plot of, essentially a movie from 1922 or a book from 1890 or whatever. And so, um, I still am a big fan of Eggers's writing and filmmaking. I'm still very excited to see whatever he chooses to do after this film. Um, just because this one didn't quite land and the message is a little muddled doesn't mean I'm, not still a fan of his. But I was hoping that it would be kind of on the level of The Witch for me, and it's just not quite.
Yeah, I would agree with all of that.
Yeah, how I felt about it is in line with what you guys are saying. I did not. The ending for Ellen did not really ring for me very well. The Thomas walking into that bedroom also just like the one of the more awkward things I could imagine. Being like, "Oh, honey, what have you been up to?" And she's just, she's like one breath left before she dies. Yeah, there are images from this film that are gonna definitely stay in my head because of the way that things were framed. So I think that's really the big takeaway is the artistry with which it was made. But yeah, I don't love the way that they did the Ellen character throughout because I found it so difficult to keep up with where she was coming from scene to scene, and then by the end, that whole thing. Egger's next film is called Werewolf, so it seems like he's kind of in a doing a bit of a trend here.
Ooh,
Werwulf.
he's gonna do all the things. So which
Yeah,
vamp
Yeah, rich vampires, werewolves,
maybe maybe
Vikings.
the one after that'll be Golem, perhaps. We'll see. Uh, but yeah, so it was not what I expected it to be, but I had very little in the way of expectations. And now I've seen one of his films. I'm not 100% sure that I would rush out to see Lighthouse or maybe The Witch. I'm more interested in, but yeah,
Yeah, Lighthouse, if based on the things that you didn't like about this film, you
will not like the light.
definitely would not like the Lighthouse. Um, because it is, avant-garde in a way that I think you will really not vibe with, but I think you would probably enjoy The Witch.
I agree.
fair enough.
Watch the witch.
I just watched Mickey 17 this week, so Robert Pattinson's in a way can do no wrong, but that movie also is kind of weird. Okay. Well, let's wrap it up, guys. Any other final parting thoughts?
No, I think we have gone over every detail and Nazi at this point.
We have. We really we did. We tread it
Uh,
well.
but it was fun. It was fun to talk about it with you all. I actually and I am curious. I am excited to see his werewolf film. Um, so I would definitely want to talk about that eventually when it comes out.
We are also getting to bring it back to Guillermo del Toro, where we, kind of discussed at the beginning. We are also getting another um, extremely seminal text in terms of his Frankenstein is coming out. I think this year in 2025. There was just a teaser release for it the other day, so we'll get a kind of a counterpoint reinterpretation of one of those classic texts that everyone kind of knows the story beats and imagery and stuff like that from. So I'm cautiously excited for that as well. So it's I don't know, it'll be an interesting counterpoint to this film, I think.
Yeah, that'll be interesting to look at. Well,
I guess the
go
only
ahead.
other thought I have, and yeah, this is kind of something that I was going to make this point at the beginning, and then I didn't. I think it's a little odd that the only like really original movies being made these days are horror, and I'm just trying to figure out what this means for our like collective psyche that you know, we really don't see a lot of original dramatic films or comedies being made anymore, but there are oodles of uh, oftentimes quite experimental horror films coming out every year. And I just think it's, I don't know. I don't know what it says about us that we are wanting to plumb the depths of, human depravity or, supernatural depravity so much year after year. I watch them. I enjoy them. You guys obviously run a whole podcast about, many of these works. So I think it speaks to our desire for them, but it's fascinating to me that essentially everything is, and this is a remake, so it doesn't really fit, but The Witch and other films of Eggers certainly do. Um, we want to be taken to the brink, I guess, and that's pretty much the only place where audiences will go to see, will take a chance on, a film that they don't know. So
Or
anyway,
Barbie.
or Barbie. That's based on a toy.
A little bit about escapism too.
Yeah,
So I
yeah.
think that it is directly um related to that possibly as well.
Well, I'm gonna have to wrap it up here. I've got little fingers tapping on the glass. So I'm gonna bid everybody a fair time. God.
Nice.
We'll come back and join us again on Reanimated when we will be talking about something else disturbing or Barbie next time. And you can let us know what you thought of Nosferatu by emailing us at reanimatedpodcast@gmail.com or find us online at reanimated.podbean.com. And so I say adieu.
Goodbye.
Bye bye for now.